Now, we must understand this. People are thinking that these temples are places of prayer. These temples are not places of prayer. They're different types of energies. Shani means Saturn. These are temples created for the different planets in the solar system. The impact of different planets upon our own physiology, our psychological structure and the way many things happen is obvious to us in many different ways. There is a complex calculation about taking your time of birth, date of birth and the latitude and longitude of birth. Taking these numbers, they make a complex calculation as to what are the planets which have maximum influence on you in your life. All these things are relevant to you to some extent. As I said, if you have an inner technology, you level out all these things, all these impacts. Saturn, which is a small faraway planet, takes 30 years to complete one revolution around the sun. Because it is a 30-year cycle, because there are what is called as 4 segments in a day and 4 segments in a year according to what happens on this planet. Once in 30 years, Saturn will have a certain influence upon you. So, people who come from India, what is it, Sada Sata? What is it called in North India? Sade Sat. Sade Sat influence in the north. People who come from Tamil Nadu, Elarisani. So 7.5 years of influence of Saturn upon you will be there. At this time, you become more susceptible. It's not that you must have it. You become more susceptible to disease, depression, disasters, death. You are in the hands of decomposition.
We're walking the park, doing another YouTube video, doing a regular occurrence this I think. Right, okay, so who's done the homework? Let's set you. No, hands up. 1 or 2 of you. Yeah. Well, you're getting a star. Rest of you, I would have given you a leg up. But we'll start as we go on. Well, are you going down? Yeah, I'm out with Will again. Right, so, Saturn. Now the reason why I'm going to talk about Saturn is that it has a lot to do with the religions of the world and how the structures are set up, how the banking sector is set up. We're going that way, alright. How the banking sector is set up, how… Where are you going? How education is set up. This goes on. And it's intertwined within everything. Anywhere we see them wearing black robes, like court, judges, schools, when you graduate at university, you wear black robes. These are all associated with Saturn. Now, Saturn was originally called the Black Sun. And that was his original name, either that or the Ghost Sun. Depends on which civilization you look at. The reason why it was called that was because it was very likely probably a lot closer than it used to be, well, than it is now. If you look at the ancient Egyptians with the horns on Hathor around a disc, or even Pakistani flag, or the symbol for Islam, which is crescent moon and a star, That's nothing to do with the moon and the star. It's everything to do with Saturn. This is because as the sun was blocked out by Saturn, which would have happened on a regular basis, it actually created a sort of crescent shape underneath it, just let the light filter through. And as the year went on, that crescent moved all the way around. Okay, so that was basically where that crescent moon idea came from. It's also associated with the black cube. You'll see this everywhere, all over the place. Anything that's got a black cube outside it, most multinational corporations have a black cube outside it. That's everything to do with Saturn. One of the reasons for this, which a lot of people forget about and can't really put two and two together, why Saturn is associated with the black cube, is the hexagons on top. Yes, that's right, you heard that right. There is a hexagonal storm on the northern pole of Saturn. Well, where are you going? Give me a minute, sun's run off. Like I said, there's a hexagonal storm on the top pole of Saturn. And what's a hexagon? It's a 2D shape of a cube. So, like I said, a hexagon's a 2D representation of a cube. Why a black cube? Well, Saturn was considered it was considered the furthest planet away from the sun, so it was always in darkness. It was always cold, it was always unforgiving. This is why it's also associated with Satanism and other things. All dark and brooding. It's the father of the gods, or father time, Kronos, the father of Zeus and everyone else. Also, it's associated with the Grim Reaper, death. You name it. There's a lot of things that are involved with Saturn. I mean, most people think of the sun in ancient times was the religion of choice, sun worship. No. Sorry, but you're wrong there. It was all Saturn. Then we get to the there's other strange things about Saturn that's worthy of note. Along with the northern pole having a nice little hexagon on top of it, on the southern pole it's got a massive storm that looks like an eye. I'm not kidding. You look at these pictures of it and it's unbelievable. It's just unmistakable. It looks like an eye looking out. Now, with that other strangeness, other high strangeness with it, is the radio signals that come out from it, the electrical anomalies that occur from its rings. There's also its moons. Some of its moons are remarkable. One of them is Iapetus. It's probably the most artificial looking moon you'll ever see in your life. It's got a rim going all the way around it, a ridge. It's 200 feet high. The top half of it is white. Looking, the bottom half of it is just completely black. It's also got a massive blooming crater in the front of it. Richard Hoagland put a picture in his book once. He didn't say anything with it. He just put a picture of Iapetus and then a picture of the Death Star. Just like people to make their own judgment, which is fantastic. Well, this way. Come on. This way. Okay, then we get to the rings themselves. Now, supposedly, according to NASA, there's been no new ring production. What? What's over? We're going home? No. No. Think that. There's been no new ring production. You're going to say hello?
Hello.
Apparently he's dying now. Like I said, couldn't be an actor when he grows up. Anyway, there's been no new ring production apparently to do with Saturn for billions and billions of years. Yet, during the 1980s-ish, a guy who used to be a physicist that used to work for NASA, called Norman Bergeron. Brilliant man. He wrote a book that's out of print now, and it's probably one of the most valuable books you will ever get hold of, called Ringmakers of Saturn. There's a reason why it's out of print. In that book, it shows huge ships, and I mean ships, right? These things are the size of the Earth, they're absolutely massive, huge things, basically flying around Saturn and laying new rings behind them. Now, speculation over what they were doing, could be mining, could be anything, but the fact that they're there is a bit troubling, you know what I mean, a bit weird. Anyway, like I was saying, Saturn, it's been revered for a long time. There's the reason why I bring this up, and it'll tie into the Nibiru legends. Basically, there's a stealer, and a Sumerian stealer that's made out of a cylinder steel of when Enki is giving humanity the technology of the plough. Now, it's probably the most famous Sumerian picture that there is. The reason being is because it supposedly shows a picture of our solar system that I tend to disagree with. There's a reason being for that. Most scholars and most people who actually examine the picture miss out certain little aspects. As well as the planets that are going around the supposed solar system, there's also additional little dots dotted around the whole picture, spread out in way, you know, just in strange orbits all over the place. Just little nodules that have no place. And the reason why they have no place is because if you're using the solar system model, they will have no place. Whereas if you use the Saturn model, Saturnian model, they actually match up to pretty much all of the sort of a scaled down version of the Saturn system as a whole, or rather its most prominent moons. Another dead giveaway, which most people forget about, is that the star in the middle of that solar system, supposed solar system, has a 6-pointed star on it over the top of it, overlaid. To me, that means only one thing. Whenever that 6-sided star turns up, you can guarantee that it's something to do with Saturn in some way, shape or form. That planet in the middle is Saturn. That disk in the middle, supposed sun in the middle. Which brought me to another conclusion. The way they go on about Nibiru having to thicken its atmosphere and use gold to basically stop its atmosphere from being destroyed. It made me think of the moons that are around Saturn. There's one in particular, that being Titan. Titan has a strange atmosphere. It's got a very, even NASA will admit themselves, it's got a very sort of proto-Earth sort of atmosphere full of methane lakes and blah 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 blah. I tend to have a different view. I think that that's the Nibiru that they were going on about in the Sumerian tablets where the Anunnaki are from. What? You're still lost, are you? Okay, we'll go that way and we'll see if we can carry on and get lost even more, eh? I don't know, I can get lost in not even in a blooming park, but here we go. Right, so, like I said, in my view, I think we're looking at Saturn very likely being Nibiru, or what they're on about, which means that all these catastrophists, all these people that are swearing blind that Nibiru's coming, it's going to destroy the Earth. No, it's not. No, it's not. It never has and never will. some people of note who go on about the Black Sun theory, by the way, is a guy called David Talbot, who wrote a fantastic book whose title absolutely escapes me right at this precise second. And like I've said before, Immanuel Velikovsky, who has some incredible theories on how the universe, well, how the solar system formed, and several other different theories that are part of it. Exploding planet theory, all sorts, and a lot of it is being vindicated for. A lot these days, NASA are suddenly realising that, hold on, this guy was really onto something. I mean, it's not bad for a psychologist, you know what I mean? It was just reading historical and theological texts, really. That's all they were doing. What are you doing, Will? Anyway, that's Saturn. Up next is a video by David Ack on, did you guess it, Saturn. This guy, like I said, the guy gets a lot of flack for some of his theories that do sound a little bit outlandish. To be honest, I have a bit of trouble believing some of it. It makes me a bit but he has been writing a lot of stuff which he don't really get credit for. But he does do a blinding documentary, a blinding sort of lecture, or as part of his 10-hour lecture on Saturn, which is coming up next. Right, homework again. Back to homework. Okay, my next video, we're going to start talking about ancient man. Basically, the different lost civilizations and where they stem from. Possibly touch on the Vedas and some of Michael Tellinger's work, especially the ruins that he's found in South Africa. It's just incredible, Adam's calendar, SL. Some of you have probably already heard of Adam's calendar and that. Or the the cattle corrals that mainstream historians like attribute these structures that are dotted all over South Africa. I mean, to say that they used them to herd cattle is just absolutely ridiculous. There's no freaking doors. We're going to put the cows in, kick them over the wall. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So he's got a pretty mad theory about what they were used for, and we'll cover that as well. So, all right, if you're going to take your coat off, you're going to get cold though. Okay, you're really hot, fair enough. There we go. Right, off you run. So yeah, I advise watching some of Michael Tellinger's stuff. Especially more specifically on Adam's calendar. It's very interesting. Especially when he's talking to Credo Mutler as well, who is the Zulu's official chief storyteller. The guy's incredible, amazing, blooming, amazing stories that he's got. But anyway, so yeah, Ancient Man next time. All right. Unfortunately, like I said, this is a bit of a quick one, just on Saturn. We will cover Saturn again later, but you've got the basics now anyway. All right, that's all you need to know for the moment, and we'll continue next time. But here's David Dark anyway, and then please be followed by our old friend Tank Guru. All right, okay, see you later, bye.
I think I can throw a little something out there. Yeah. I started talking about Saturn back in the late 70s in lectures about the planet Saturn, how it was. It's the main today. Saturn is the main god of the Jewish people. So when the Jewish people today are the worshippers of the planet Saturn. Now, there was a long time ago in history, the Jews were worshippers of the moon. They were moon worshippers. But today, they are still carrying on some of the moon worship, but they are mostly heavy into Saturn worship today. And so when you hear that the Jews are God's chosen people and they were the one monotheistic people and all of those wonderful things that we hear about the Jewish religion, what you don't hear is that they started off being a lunar cult in the Middle East, the worshippers of the moon, and that's when we talk about Moses. Moses was a leader of a lunar cult, the moon worshippers. And so today we refer to them as Hebrews, or the Hebrews are the Jewish people. But they started off as moon worshippers. And, all you got to do is just open up a history book and read about the religions of the ancient Hebrew people, and you'll find out that Moses was the leader of a lunar cult. He was a moon worshiper. And then you find out, in fact, there was no Moses. He never existed at all.
Right.
It was a god that was used in relation to the moon worship by the Arabs. So the Arabs had a moon god. And in the ancient Arabic world, they still do today. He's called Allah. Allah is simply a moon god, and so the Hebrew word for Allah is Yahweh. So the Hebrews worship Yahweh as a moon god, and the Arabs worship Yahweh or Allah. And so Allah and Yahweh are the same god. They're both moon worshippers. They're both the moon. But originally in the ancient Arabic, the moon god was called Sin, S-I-N. So look up the word S-I-N, sin, and it will tell you that's not doing something bad in Christianity as a sin. No. S-I-N was the name of the moon god in Arabia. And the Arabians were great moon worshippers. They still are. Today, Islam is still worshiping the moon. They call it Allah, but the Hebrews call it Yahweh. And so, it's really interesting stuff when you get into, but we really need a better connection, and we need about 4 hours for me to sit down and explain to you where all of these religious ideas have come from. Because like I said, I've been studying theology since 1959. So we're talking about some 58 years ago, and I'm talking about subjects that most people haven't spent 58 minutes with. And the old ancient Phoenician, Canaanite, Philistines, Canaanite, that area of the world we call Israel, Lebanon, and all around that area. They were called thousands of years ago. It wasn't called Israel. It was called Cana. They were called the ancient people of Cana, the Canaanites. And the Canaanites had a god. and their god was the planet Saturn. And he was referred to as the Lord of the Rings. And so today they're still making movies in Hollywood about Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is the planet Saturn. He's got rings and he's the Lord. And so consequently today Judaism is still, the Jews in Hollywood are still making movies about their God, Lord of the Rings. And so Saturn became the single most important facet of Judaism today. Now, the point I wanted to make is that in that ancient language, not ancient Hebrew, but in the old ancient Phoenician Canaanite world of the ancient world in the Middle East, that planet we call Saturn, but they didn't call it Saturn thousands of years ago. They called that planet Shabbath, S-H-A-B-B-A-T-H. Shabbath, S-H-A-B-B-A-T-H, Shabbath. And they said, if you're going to worship Shabbath, then you need to have a particular day devoted to the worship of Shabbath. And they called it Sabbath. So today, when you see the Jews are worshiping God on the Sabbath, remember one of the 10 Commandments is to remember to keep holy the Sabbath. Sabbath is the planet Saturn, Shabbat. So if you're going to worship Saturn, you do it on the Sabbath. And so today, everybody thinks, the Christians think it's such a holy day, the Sabbath. No, it's the worship of the planet Saturn, Lord of the Rings. Ask the Jews in Hollywood, they'll explain it to you.
How did the ancient civilizations know that Saturn existed?
The Chinese knew that Saturn had rings 5,000 years ago. They had drawings, and from going back 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, they knew that Saturn had rings. And that's a whole story about the planets. What you need to know is that today, where the planets are out there in the stars, in the starry sky, where the planets are today is not where they were 5,000 years ago. They weren't where they are today. They were in different places before.
Of course.
Now we know where they are. And so something happened to our solar system, which really screwed up the whole electromagnetic field of our solar system, and the planets all moved to different places. So something happened many thousands of years ago that really screwed up our solar system. And it caused some of the effect it had on the Earth was our Grand Canyon. Like in the United States, the Grand Canyon was made by an exceptionally powerful electrical force field, coming out of the Earth, jumping into space, and hitting another planet. And that's where we get our Grand Canyon. All of these things are well known. I mean, I'm just reiterating stuff that most people know is in books all over the world anyway. But
you're watching Freedom Free For All. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to us on YouTube. You'll receive notifications every time we go live and before our show every Tuesday night at 7:30 Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah, I think that all these things that NASA do are actually connected to something greater, or most of it anyway. And someone who did a documentary on the moon and the nature of artifacts on the moon talked to a NASA insider who said we lied about everything. And I think we have to keep that in mind when they are producing these probes and these missions. What they actually tell us they're about and what they tell us they've found is not going to be the truth unless the truth will not affect our perception of reality. I've written extensively about the moon. I don't believe, and even more so as I understand more, I don't believe that the moon is is a natural body, or at least, at the very least, it's a construct from a body that maybe is natural, but has been, if you like, converted. And one of the things we talked about during the show was this idea of suppression of people's perception of the possible. And we are going to have to wide open our minds, crash open our minds so wide, if we're going to start to understand the nature of the human plight. For instance, the idea that something that is 2,160 miles in diameter, the moon, could be a construct, is beyond the comprehension, the sense of possibility of most people, because it's just, we can't build that. Yeah, no, we can't build that, but that does not mean that it cannot be built if you understand the nature of reality. And one of the things that I've been focusing on in the last few years, and I'm a big time at this moment, is the nature of Saturn and what Saturn is. It's very clear that at one point Saturn did not have rings, but was actually, I say Saturn is a dwarf sun, a dwarf star. I said Jupiter's the same. The Saturn gives off 2.5 times more energy than it receives from the sun. It is a form of star, not a planet as we perceive it. And the rings are artificial, I suggest. There's a man called Norman Bergrun who has a long history in aeronautics and space research and science and that whole arena. He's in his 90s now, but he wrote a book some years ago, back in the 80s I think it was, called The Ringmakers of Saturn, because he observed from the pictures sent back by the Voyager missions, Voyager 1 and 2 to Saturn, also to Jupiter, but to Saturn then, that there were gigantic electromagnetic phenomena in the rings of Saturn that were actually creating them. This all fits with what I say Saturn is, which is a gigantic broadcasting system, which is broadcasting this fake reality in league with the moon, which is like something that picks that up and amplifies it at the Earth, so we get it big time strong. And this is the way that at least part of this matrix is formed.
Haven't you written in the past, though, that, and let me go back to Mars for a second, David, and all this stuff is in your books, and it's very intriguing, very interesting about the moon and certainly Saturn, and again, it's like the reptilian thing. We see the demagoguery of it. We see it used everywhere, and they worship it, so we should be suspicious. Talk about suspicious minds. You had written in a few of your books talking about Mars having been the original colony, that Mars was destroyed or burned out, and then the people had moved here, and then in fact a lot of the Aryan race, Aryan worship comes from something like Mars. Are you still in that mind?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was going to go on, but you've taken me there, which is great, about Mars, because there's an excellent book written quite a long time ago now by a man called David Tolbert, who seems to be an excellent researcher, and he's involved in this whole area of the electric universe, which is fundamentally important to understanding how the universe works. And he wrote a book years ago called The Saturn Myth. And the Saturn myth was the result of what seems like decades of research into ancient legends, accounts, symbols relating to Saturn. And it's fascinating. I mean, you mentioned about things being all around us, so we should look at them. Well, Saturn is all around us in the most extraordinary way in terms of symbols. There's Saturn symbolism everywhere. Courts are Saturn symbols. The black gowns of judges and when you get your degree in education, that is Saturn. The cube is Saturn. This is why they have the black cube in Mecca, which is the focus of worship of the Islamic religion. It's everywhere, and I go into it in the book, so I'm really going to go into this at Wembley in big time as well, and I'm going further on all the time as I understand more. And it's one of the big pennies that dropped with me that brought this kaleidoscope into much greater focus, Jack, was when I realized that actually Saturn was once the prime sun of the Earth. It was in a very different position to the one where it is now, and it didn't have rings. And there was this phenomenal cataclysm, which people like Emmanuel Velikovsky wrote about in the 50s, to great ridicule, of course, but people like David Tolbert and the Electric Universe fraternity now that have got this whole area of science, which is very, very credible. They are supporting this whole basic theme, not every detail, but the theme of Velikovsky's work, which was that there was this fantastic cataclysm, which links to the Great Flood and all the ancient accounts of the earth tipping over and mountains soaring out of the earth and all this stuff in the ancient past. And the way that the solar system was rearranged. And Tolbert's reading of this from the ancient accounts is that there was a catastrophic interaction during this cataclysmic event between the Earth and Mars, and enormous electromagnetic bolts were exchanged between the two. And Mars, which was nothing like, well, I say it is now, it's nothing like we're told it is now, before this cataclysmic event, or events, it seems to be more than one, which for me, Mars was not the desolate planet that we're told it is now. That long ago. People talk about, science talks about, well, millions and millions of years ago, this happened. No, much, much, much closer than that. Because, you can bash something over a period of time, or you can set it on fire and destroy it in a minute. And something massively cataclysmic hit or affected Mars, which changed its nature very, very quickly. And the solar system we see today is nothing like the solar system that the ancients describe. And Mars is, what do they call it? What do they call Mars? They call the planet of war. And one expression of this is that there was this symbolic war in the heavens that the ancients talked about. And Saturn ceased to be the sun, because it was a two-sun system then. We had the sun that we know now, and we had the sun that we call Saturn, that was much closer to the Earth than our sun, and thus was the prime sun from Earth's perspective. And then it went walkabout. Venus went walkabout. So did Mars. So did Jupiter in this great cataclysmic event. And interestingly, the observations of Norman Bergrun, looking at the images that came back from the Voyager missions to Saturn, and which have been supported by the later Cassini mission to Saturn in its images, is that there are these enormous electromagnetic phenomena, he calls them vehicles, which are spewing out, he calls it exhaust, I say it's something very different, that are actually creating the rings. And the official story is that the rings of Saturn are full of ice, basically, ice particles of various sizes. I say that is actually some form of crystal, maybe that we don't know about on Earth and have never come across. But those rings are a receiver transmission system.
It looks like a giant antenna. Hello?
Yes, exactly. And one of the things that the Cassini mission found is that there are enormously powerful radio emissions, coming from Saturn. And there is, at one pole of Saturn, a continuous hexagram storm twirling. At the other pole, there is a storm that looks just like an eye, a continuous storm. And they found that this hexagon storm, I say hexagon, but hexagon storm, is moving in relation to the radio signal emissions. And you can go on the internet and put in sounds from Saturn in a search engine, and you can hear some of these really horrible sounds that are being recorded coming out of Saturn. And what I'm saying here is that sound represents the information matrix that the human genetic manipulation recorded by all these ancient cultures has been tuned in to pick up and decode into reality. And what reality we would be, how our reality would be different if we weren't decoding that, what I call the hack, into our reality, into our sense of reality. I don't know, but I think it is substantial. And that if that was not broadcasting and we weren't receiving and transmitting in it through manipulated DNA, then I think the world that we would be experiencing through the conscious mind would be very different to the one we are now. Exactly in line with the Matrix movies.
Let's really freak people out, because one of the top experts in planetary life was asked about why go to Mars. And he said, I wouldn't even waste my time going to Mars. He said, I would go to Euclideus, Saturn's moon, or Titan. He mentioned Euclideus, and he said that is the closest possibility of Earth atmosphere holding life. It's like a little Earth, allegedly. So here we have not only Titan, but possibly Euclideus, that could have life.
Yes, I think very different life to us, because, you know, what I'm going into now is that, you know, behind this reptilian element and behind possibly all this so-called extraterrestrial interaction, I prefer to call them interdimensionals, is a force which doesn't take form. It is like an electromagnetic form which can take any form, and it works through these other groups. And what I found fascinating was to read in some detail in the last few months the content of a find in Egypt in 1945 of a sealed jar of writings from a group that had become known as the Gnostics. The Gnostics were the people behind the great library of Alexandria, which was sacked and burned and destroyed by the Roman Church. They were basically the mentality behind the Cathars in southern France that were destroyed by the authorities and the Roman Church. Their last stand was a castle called Montségur in, I think it was 1244, something like that. And what you see as a common theme is these Gnostic thinkers, these that have this Gnostic view of the reality in the universe, end up being slaughtered, and their information, if not being destroyed, then being taken out of public circulation. I think you'll find a lot of it in the vaults of the Vatican, personally. And it's interesting what these Gnostic writings talk about. About a fifth of the writings in these sealed container discovered in Egypt, which seems to go back to around 400 AD, which was in the period when the great library of Alexandria in Egypt was destroyed. About a fifth of the writings refer to a group of entities that they call the archons, and they talk about something called the demiurge, which is their version of what Christians would call the devil or Satan. And the archons were basically what Christians would call the demons, what Islamic Muslim people would call the jinn, and what others would call fallen angels, all this stuff. And it talks about how this physical world is the realm of the archons and the demiurge. It talks about the fact that they do not have what has been decoded or translated as intentionality, which I would describe, I think, more simply as creative imagination. They don't have it. And they therefore have to parasite off those who have. and tap into their creative imagination and get them to create for them. Are we describing what we've been talking about in the show today?
Yeah.
And how that they cannot, if they had a blank sheet of paper, they could not create anything upon it. But give them a sheet of paper full of something and they could twist it, manipulate it, and edit it and censor it, but they could not actually start it from scratch because they don't have that creative imagination. And it talks about how the fact that they parasite off humanity by accessing the human mind. And on it goes. I'll go into this more at Wembley, but what I was reading was what I've uncovered in my own way and in my own language all the way through these years. I mean, it just dovetailed so perfectly. And I do feel that they are describing something that's absolutely based on fact. And when you look at it, Jack, look at our society. At every level, it is levels and different groups parasiting off other people and other groups, all the way down. Look, I mean, what greater expression of the parasital mind could you have than the human banking system? It mirrors the parasital nature of these archon entities. Everything. I mean, what is it doing? And in fact, what banking is doing, because everything is energy, it is trawling and vampiring our energy. What is money? It's energy. You put it in your pocket, you put it in your bank account, that energy becomes attached to you while it's in your ownership and therefore in your energy field. It picks up your energy. It then moves on to someone else. It picks up their energy. And when it eventually comes back to source, those who've put the money out there, all these networks around the Rothschilds, then they are trawling not only energy back plus interest. What is the interest, Jack? You know, in the holographic world, it's more money on top of principal. But the interest at the energetic level is human energy on top of the energy of money that was put out there in the first place.
But that is your life source. People forget this. This is why we say it's so important if you want change in the world to use that life force, if it's converted to money or whatever buying power, consumer power you have, and vote with that. Forget the voting at the electronic voting booth. Put your energy into things that are ethical, that you support, that expand consciousness and freedom throughout the universe, and you'll see a different situation, David. That is the answer. That can happen. That's our life force. Is we go to work every day. We work, or we toil the land and create food, and that creates a commodity that can then be traded or sold. But if we're giving all our money, whether it's wittingly or unwittingly, to Goldman Sachs or to J.P. Morgan or to Chase Manhattan or Citibank or whatever Rothschild front company it is, we're going to keep getting the same thing over and over. Are you ready to answer some questions?
Yeah, these people are parasites, and if I can find it, I just want to give you a quick quote on this situation that we're currently discussing. Let me find it because it's important to give a feel on the fact that they know that what I've just said about money is true. There was a document, I'm sure you've heard of it, no doubt, that came to light years ago called Quiet Weapons for Quiet Wars, and it described in some detail how mass social engineering and mass mind control goes on. And one of the things it talked about at some length was how money is used in to this end. And this is what it said about money in the context of what we've just talked about. Economics is only a social extension of a natural energy system. Since energy is the key to all activity on the face of the earth, it follows that in order to attain a monopoly of energy, raw materials, goods and services, everything you've just mentioned, and to establish a world system of slave labor, it is necessary to have a first strike capability in the field of economics. In order to maintain our position, it is necessary that we have absolute first knowledge of the science of control over all economic factors and the first experience of at engineering the world economy. In order to achieve such sovereignty, you must at least achieve this one end, that the public will not make either the logical or mathematical connection between economics and the other energy sciences, or learn to imply such knowledge. To make a short story of it all, it was discovered that an economy obeyed the same laws as electricity, and that all of the mathematical theory and practical and computer knowledge developed for the electronic field could be directly applied to the study of economics. This discovery was not openly declared, you surprise me, and its more subtle implications were and are kept a closely guarded secret. For example, that in an economic model, wait for this, my goodness me, for example, that in an economic model, human life is measured in dollars, and that the electric spark generated when opening a switch connected to an active inductor is mathematically analogous to the initiation of war. It's all happening, Jack, in the electromagnetic field.
And this is why they need me to wear my seatbelt, because they don't see me as a human life. They see me of units of energy translated into fractional reserve lending. I'm not a person anymore, David. I'm a credit rating. I found this out looking for a flat the last 3 or 4 months, and realized that my financials weren't in good order because I live in the underground economy, and it's really changed just in the last 2 years. I'm on a no rent list. I find I'm on a no food list. I'm on a no this list, a no that list, and they want to figure out exactly what I'm worth as a human to see if I can even get on a plane and fly at an airport. So we've really lost our way, and people like David, I think, are really a big cold bucket of ice water sometimes. I want to get to some questions because I don't want to keep it too much longer, and there's 10 questions, so the quicker you answer them, the quicker I get you out of here, and I want to make sure everybody got input. All right, David? Okay. David Icke with us, davidicke.com, our good friend. I recently watched, this is, by the way, from Jim. I recently watched David's video at Oxford Union. At the end, he explained how he likens reality to a radio frequency. He spoke about that earlier. He told a story of a hypnotist that made a man unable to see his daughter standing right in front of him. His question is that if this is true, are we all on the same frequency? Because how do we all see the same reality, i.e. people and events? And if you raise your consciousness, do you still see this reality as well as an extension of it?
Well, this collective reality is a collective information field. So we will look out of the window and we'll see the same car passing in the street. But what we think about it and what we make of it and how we react to it and respond to it will be different. That's where we put our unique spin on things. So we're in this reality. We are, in terms of the conscious mind, tuned in to this frequency. Thus, we all pick up the same collective reality. But that's only the starting point, because, in the same way that I described how this guy was hypnotized so he couldn't see his daughter standing in front of him, his daughter in her prime state is an energetic field. She's not the hologram that we see. That is created when the five senses take energetic information, the prime state of this reality, and turn it into electrical information, which is communicated to the brain, which then decodes that information into a holographic digital reality. If you don't go through that process of decoding that energetic field through into the holographic, through the brain, you will not in your conscious world see that energy field. So all the hypnotist did was to implant a blocking frequency, a blocking code, through the hypnotic nature of the way he worked the guy, to stop that man's brain decoding the energy field of his daughter, which is outside of the realm of the conscious mind. Thus, she was not decoded through into the holographic realm of the conscious mind. Thus, everyone in the room who was doing that could see her. He could not see her, even though she was in front of him. Why? Because she wasn't decoded through by him into the realm of the conscious mind. Now, this opens up a great Pandora's box of how you can individually and collectively do what that hypnotist did, through various and infinite numbers of, increasing numbers of techniques, to stop people individually and collectively decoding reality at the energetic level and bringing it through into the holographic level. So what is going on in the electromagnetic field, in the energetic level of this reality, which if we weren't manipulated we would be experiencing through the conscious mind, that currently we're not. You see, once you've got this situation where if they can block the decoding mechanism, you can keep something out of human reality, five sense reality, then you know, where's the limit? The sky's the limit. And this is happening all the time. And a lot of this manipulation through symbolism is doing that. It's putting blocking frequencies in, so we're not pulling everything into holographic reality that we could be experiencing. And when you start to expand your mind, you might not initially be able to see things that you couldn't before visually, but you can. I mean, how many people have been through this? You can then start to see things in terms of your perception of seeing the world in a completely different way. Oh, I couldn't see that was going on before, but now it's pretty obvious to me. Why? Because you have expanded the realm of, or the range that you are perceiving the world in, and thus you're now starting to look into the world from outside of this matrix and see things within it you couldn't see before.
Yeah, so to answer…
Their Sade Sat or Realer Shani will come. At that time they will start doing certain things so that they can bridge over these pits that may arise in their life. So there is a temple for Shani Deva. So he's been, you know, personified as a god. Shani temples are mainly used for occult and exorcism. Even today, there will be one or two priests who are trained here. When on Saturdays or on a significant Saturday, whatever those Saturdays are, on those days, he will come and sit on a seat which is full of sharp nails. He will sit on this and attend to people's questions and problems and whatever. He will sit on this for hours on end. People come here with variety of things, largely for influence of occult, or they feel they are possessed or something like this. Because such things are done, the energies are kept in a certain way in the sanctum, which is not very conducive for a woman. Can a woman not enter there at all? She can if she is trained particularly for that. But it would be much more difficult to train a woman on these things than training a man on these things, simply because of a few biological advantages man has in these areas of life. Especially a woman who is in a state of pregnancy or in menstrual cycle should never enter such a space, because she is very susceptible or vulnerable at those times that she could be deeply impacted by these forces. And today somebody thinks this is discrimination. One must know the difference between discrimination and discretion. This is a certain discretion, but maybe the way it is enforced, I don't know how they've enforced, I have not been there. Maybe the way they're enforcing is crude and seems discriminatory. Probably, I'm saying, because it's not designed for them. It's not discriminatory. It's just a certain discretion, which has to be… If we don't employ discretion, then life will become very ugly and rudimentary. Don't treat every temple like it's some kind of a place of worship. It's not a place of worship. So they're designed in a certain way for a certain purpose. It needs to be conducted that way, otherwise there'll be no meaning to it.